the neurosurgeon comes in, the vascular surgeon comes in. And at the last minute, I'm like, can I wear my Whoop?
Increasingly, we get the message like subject line, Whoop saved my life.
Was that always the vision? Or do you look around amazed and surprised that you went from there to here?
I'd played sports my whole life, and I was someone who used to overtrain.
Garmin is like the 800-pound gorilla in the room. And then you have Apple and the Apple Watch. It's, arguably a crowded marketplace.
I had an advantage in a strange way in that I didn't know anything about what I was looking at.
The pressure on you has to be insane with the amount of money you raised and the expectations that come with that.
I was not fit to be a CEO. I woke up in the hospital with a panic attack. That was a big wake-up call for me. I Googled ways to cope with stress, and I discovered
there's a lot that I want to explore on the topic of your entrepreneurial journey, but I think for now I'd like to focus on the competition side of it, because even at the inception of you creating a business around this, it's, arguably a crowded marketplace. You've got, when it comes to tracking fitness and athletic training, like Garmin is like the 800-pound gorilla in the room with this long history of dominating the space, particularly with amateur and elite endurance athletes. And then with respect to the more everyday person, you have Apple and the Apple Watch, which also has this long but very different history of keeping a close eye on up and coming, fledgling technology companies and sort of biding their time and watching from a distance until one day deciding today's the day, we're just going to gobble it up. And I would imagine that would have been, or maybe, at some point in your trajectory is sort of an existential fear that you have to harbor. So how did you, navigate that, and find your niche in this crowded space and differentiate yourself?
Well, one thing we did right is that we were pretty focused initially on an athletic market. So this is now, we're talking about 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And we wanted to be the best at strain and recovery for that market. What that also means is there was a lot of things we weren't doing, right? We weren't building a smartwatch. We weren't going to do emails. We didn't have a screen on the product. We weren't building a whole app space for a wearable product. We were incredibly specific about why we were building hardware. And a lot of technology companies, particularly companies that dare to build hardware, get themselves in trouble with what's called scope creep. Scope creep is where you just start to add more and more features to something. Mm-hmm. I've talked before about why having a screen on the product would create a lot of new scope. All of a sudden you say, well, it should show the time. Yes. Well, it should show your heart rate data. Yes. Well, it should show your strain and recovery. Yes. Well, maybe it should give you some notifications while you're working out. Yes. Well, if it does notifications, maybe it should do email and calls.
Yes. Suddenly you're reverse engineering just a smartwatch.
And you just built a terrible Apple Watch and they're going to kill you. But it was very easy to get there. The scope creep stuff happens incredibly innocently. And when you chart it back, you're kind of like, yeah, that actually all made sense. But you end up in this completely different place. And so there was a certain rigidity I think I had in the early days around what we were building and who we were building it for. Mm-hmm. And I think that served us well. Now that rigidity also made me, a very difficult entrepreneur and I needed to overcome that rigidity with time. But the really strict point of view of we're building a super accurate wearable for health monitoring. It's going to focus on elite athletes. That's what we're doing. We're not doing anything else. Oh, but this could have interesting medical applications. I don't care. I don't want to do that, Mm-hmm. Well, what about the consumer market? You should make money. So nope, we're not doing that. So I did have a very strict point of view. And the arc that we were trying to create again was we're going to start with athletes because that's a small market. Ironic, right? Start with athletes because it's a small market, not a big market. When you have a small market, again, you can differentiate more. And if we can get them all to wear it, then we can build this brand around performance. Mm-hmm. And the brand piece of Whoop, I think, is subtly one of the things that has helped us differentiate.
There are models out there for, an analogous version of that. Like Tesla starts with that Lotus supercar or whatever, and then, moves into the consumer market slowly over time. But the real key piece for me in what you just shared is this decision to focus on strain and recovery. Almost all other workout trackers out there are doing steps, heart rate, of course, but it's pace, distance, time, things like that. So how did you arrive at that as your sort of secure white space that you could, expand upon and create something meaningful?
Strain and recovery really dates back to the very origin story of the company, because I was a college athlete. I was playing squash at Harvard. I'd played sports my whole life. And I was someone who used to overtrain. And I'm sure you know a lot about overtraining, given your background.
15 years over is crazy. Like my entire swimming career, I was overtrained.
Yeah.
Like, and there was no kind of intentionality around recovery whatsoever. It's just go in and kill yourself for 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours at night, and go as hard as you can, as often as you can, and then spin the roulette wheel on a 2-week taper and like see how it goes. And I just walked around all of high school and college like a complete zombie.
Totally. And so I had this exact experience, and I remember kind of waking up one day my freshman year just exhausted after what had been a great stretch of training, and feeling like I was doing the right things and just having no idea why. And by the way, it wasn't I was exhausted that day. I felt exhausted for the next 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And overtraining, it turns out, happens to 70% of athletes. And it's really, at least again, back to 12 years ago, it really wasn't understood. I also think 2010 to like 2015 was this sort of strange period where we got to like the ultimate more is more in sports and training. Like it was not, can you do a 2 a day, but can you do a 3 a day? And the whole word recovery didn't even exist. And so I just got interested in, well, what could I measure about my body to understand overtraining? It was that simple of a question. And then when I really unpacked overtraining, I realized that it was just this relationship between how recovered is your body and what are you then doing to your body? Or said differently, how recovered are you and what strain are you putting on your body? And so I was likely in college someone who was run down a lot, but putting a ton of strain on my body. Not to mention I was, a dumb college kid who was going out drinking and, staying up all the time and had other, lifestyle issues. But it would have shown up very clearly in my data if I had had Whoop back then. And so the physiology research that I started doing was then around what metrics would you need to create a notion of recovery? What metrics would you need to create a notion of strain? Because it was obvious that there wasn't just one number for recovery. Otherwise, it probably would have existed. Mm-hmm. Or there wasn't one number for strain. But I realized if you could piece together things like heart rate variability and resting heart rate and respiratory rate and sleep, all of a sudden you could create a picture of recovery. And the physiological papers that I was reading were, 15 athletes over a year wearing different things and kind of hacking together data. But there were still signs that there was something powerful there. And that's what got me excited. I believed like, okay, if we could get rid of this antiquated technology and have it be continuous data, and if we could then structure that data to summarize it in scores like strain and recovery, we could tell, at least in those days, an athlete how to train.
So how did you go from there to drilling down on what the most important variables are from, obviously top level like sleep to sleep quality, sleep efficiency, and then HR? I mean, like no one was talking about HRV until Whoop. Like you kind of like launched that into the mainstream lexicon. And I would imagine like when you're sifting through all of these papers, most of sports science, like you said, small sample sizes, it's really hard to kind of determine what's real, what's not. And it seems like it's kind of all over the place. I mean, was this like a thesis project or like how, did you just have this obsession in solving this problem?
I mean, it essentially became a thesis project. It was like an unofficial thesis. I, ended up writing like a 75-page physiology paper for a class. And the way I got to that was by doing a lot of research. Now, I had an advantage in a strange way in that I didn't know anything about what I was looking at. Mm. And I mean, it was an advantage because I went in with really no bias. I was like, let me just see what's out there. I had no preconceived notion of what the data should be, of what the metrics should be. I was just looking for something that was pulling me in, that could get me excited. And heart rate variability is the metric that led me to found Whoop. Like if you wanted to draw a straight line, it would come from that metric. And it's because there were these papers dating back to the 80s that were so powerful. You know, Olympic lifters using heart rate variability in the morning to determine how much weight they should lift. Professional cyclists using heart rate variability, again in the morning, we'll come back to that, to determine how hard they should ride that day. The CIA used heart rate variability to determine lie detection tests. Cardiologists were using heart rate variability on former heart failure patients to determine if someone was going to have another heart attack. And so I'm sitting there, you know, in a library at Harvard, and I'm wondering, why have I never even heard of this statistic? And then I started to ask myself, well, how do you measure heart rate variability? And when you peel that back, then you realize why no one's measured it. It's because it requires essentially an electrocardiogram and being hooked up to all this stuff. And that's expensive, antiquated, cumbersome equipment. And again, we're talking about 12 years ago or 15 years ago. And so it struck me that if you could build technology that could measure this metric, heart rate variability, let alone anything else, and it could measure it at like the same time every day. I also realized that was important about heart rate variability because it was such a sensitive metric, which is to say that it's constantly changing. You were going to need to develop a baseline for an individual, and then you were going to need to compare everything to that baseline. And so I realized that it wasn't just that you needed to measure this thing. You needed to be able to measure it continuously. And that was another breakthrough in hindsight of the whole idea for Whoop, was this idea of continuous data. Mm-hmm. Continuous data is the reason that this doesn't have a screen. It's the reason we invented a modular battery pack. It's the reason that the bands have all sorts of different looks and feels and colors. It's the reason we're not a watch, because we don't want to compete with other watches. Like, we wanted to develop everything about the product such that you would never take it off.
Maybe it would be worthwhile to explain what heart rate variability is and why this is an important thing to track.
Okay,
and what it tells us.
We'll geek out on it for a second. So heart rate variability is the amount of time between successive beats of the heart. If your heart is beating at 60 beats per minute, it's literally not beating every second. This is very counterintuitive, but it might beat at, say, 1.2 seconds, and then 0.8 seconds, and then 0.7 seconds, and then 1.3 seconds. And that difference in time between successive beats of the heart is a good thing. And the reason for this is heart rate variability is looking at your autonomic nervous system. Your autonomic nervous system consists of sympathetic and parasympathetic activity. So sympathetic activity is activation. So that's like heart rate up, blood pressure up, respiration up. When you're stressed, when you're starting to exercise, when you think about a fire in the corner of the room, that's all sympathetic. Parasympathetic is all the opposite. Heart rate down, blood pressure down, respiration down. It helps you fall asleep. When you inhale, that's sympathetic. Heart rate goes up. When you exhale, that's parasympathetic, heart rate goes down. And the more balanced sympathetic and parasympathetic activity are, the higher your heart rate variability. And therefore, a higher heart rate variability in comparison to a baseline of a heart rate variability is typically indicating that your body is in a state of rest or it's more balanced. When it's out of balance, that's a sign that your body might be run down, might be under stress. And if you extrapolate on what I just said, and you're able to capture heart rate variability in a very specific control, which is how Whoop measures heart rate variability. We measure it while you're sleeping, and in particular during slow wave sleep when your body's restoring itself. Then you're able to look at that metric every day and have a real sense for the state of someone's body. Mm-hmm. And so we use heart rate variability as one of a few metrics, but a very important metric to determine if your body's peaking physically, if it's run down, if you're getting sick. It's got all these other fascinating indicators that we can go into. But it is a beautiful metric, and one day I imagine every human being will be measuring it.
What do people not understand about heart rate variability? Because I do know that we all have our baseline, and that baseline can vary wildly. I have friends that have a very low heart rate variability baseline, and then other friends who just have an insanely high one. And the people that are on the low end of that are sort of freaked out. You know, they're like, how come I thought I was really fit, so-and-so is really high. What can you say about how people should think about that if their baseline is on that lower end?
It's worth saying that heart rate variability is in part genetic. So your baseline out of the gates is going to start from a genetic place. It's also going to be based on your fitness. It's going to be based on your state. So, if your body's super run down for a month, or you're overtrained, or you've got Lyme disease, it's going to be crushed relative to what otherwise would be its baseline. I think what's important about heart rate variability is mostly comparing your heart rate variability to yourself. Yes, we share, a public sort of aggregate analysis of heart rate variability, which, looks something like 20-year-olds at 80 ms, 30-year-olds at 70 ms, and then it starts to drop quite quickly, 40, 50-year-olds, now you're at 40 and 30 ms. And so you kind of see this slope of it declining dramatically with age. And one great thing to look at if you've been on Whoop for a while is just, can you keep your heart rate variability flat as you age? And I mean this just looking at an average of a year over a year over a year. That's a good indicator that your body is getting fitter or you're staying healthy, because with age it will decline, and it's a very sensitive metric.
How malleable is it? Like, if you are very intent on elevating your baseline HRV, like, what is your sense with all this data that you have of what's a reasonable kind of aim in terms of trying to elevate it?
Well, you can move it enormously. Obviously, it starts from what place you're in. If you're someone who's out of shape and you've got a lot of bad habits, you drink a lot of alcohol, you smoke, you don't sleep very much, you're stressed all the time. Like, someone like that could triple their heart rate variability. They could dramatically move it. I think for the average person who's pretty healthy or who's weekend warrior, that kind of thing, if you can move your HRV 5 to 10% over the course of a year upwards, that's a big win. And if you can do that for a couple of years, you're going to be a totally different person in 2 years.
One of the questions I get most frequently from people who are like, what's that on your wrist? Which happens like all the time. I thought everybody knew what this was at this point. Yeah. But when you're out in the world, you realize like, oh, there's still a lot of people that don't. And I explain to them what it is. The common kind of refrain from that is, well, I have an Apple Watch and it has a sensor on it and it's doing all of these things. So why would I need that? Don't I already have that? Like, so what is the misconception that people have in terms of the difference between what they're going to get with a smartwatch product versus what you guys are doing with your sensor and platform?
Well, I think the first core thing to understand is that if a product has a screen, it's dedicating a lot of resources to that screen. So if there's a whole app interface and things of that nature, that's just more resourcing that's going towards an interface that could otherwise go towards health monitoring or go towards battery life and the notion of continuous. Something to understand in technology in general is that it's like the size of the product's battery life, the number of features that it has, and the quality of the data. You don't get all of those things. In fact, they tend to trade off from one another. For example, you could have a really big product with a really long battery life and probably a lot of features and a lot of data, but it might look like you've got a missile on your arm, right? Whereas a lot of the sensors are about the same size. So let's put that aside. One obvious fork is a lot of the smartwatches have 24 hours or less battery life. The latest Whoop has 14 days. Okay, so that's kind of a fork right there that sort of shows you the difference in how we've thought about the product. Another is, of course, the data and the sophistication of the data. There's plenty of studies out there that show how Whoop is better than competitors at measuring things like sleep and heart rate and heart rate variability and so on and so forth. And so we're quite proud of that. And I think that's been a challenge for a big company like Apple to decide what they want to be, because presumably they could build great health sensing, but they're doing so many things that their health sensing is not very good. I mean, they can't really measure sleep. And so that's just sort of a kind of an obvious fork in the road. And I think if you're a consumer, you have to decide, do I want to go all in on understanding my health and have this 24/7 coach and companion and build this data of like a data repository of my life that I can learn from and grow from? Or do I want kind of lightweight data that's sometimes accurate, sometimes not, but a bunch of other features and kind of a continuation of my iPhone.
Mm-hmm.
And, fortunately, we've seen a lot of people be focused on health.
On the subject of HRV, that is the one thing that is often not intuitive for me. Like,
yeah,
I'll be surprised. Like, I'll wake up feeling great, and then I'll look at my Whoop and, oh, wow, like my recovery score is low. What's my HRV? Oh, it doesn't feel like I would be having a subpar HRV that day. And that helps me make an informed decision about how much I'm going to exert myself that day. And I often will modify like my training or whatnot accordingly. And I think that is an important point to make because any serious athlete has a level of connection with their own body that is unusual, right? And we all kind of grew up learning how much to train, how hard to push ourselves, how much to recover based on feel. And this is something that doesn't necessarily correlate to feel. And I think the other piece there is the sort of stress score that you get, particularly overnight. Like, it's amazing to me when I look at what was happening with my stress levels while I was sleeping and seeing like these peaks and valleys and it being like way higher, and then trying to like do a forensic analysis of like my behavior leading up to that evening to figure out like what caused that. And that's been super helpful to me, and also something that, my intuition wouldn't have been able to like figure out.
Yeah, I think that's the powerful thing about building this relationship with the data. And I think that everyone in the journey of collecting Whoop data decides how much am I just going to stick to what I feel versus trust the numbers that disagree with me. The best way I think to approach it is to try to use the data to then inform your intuition and make it more of a symbiotic relationship versus who am I going to believe today? And I like the way you described it, which is, okay, I'll see some numbers that are different than I thought, and maybe then I'll modulate how much I actually do to my body. The stress before sleep thing is a very interesting metric. And I think in general, our stress monitoring, there's a lot more that we're going to be able to reveal with that and do from that. Overall, I'm really excited about the fact that we're collecting all of this data 24/7. It's really accurate. And with all of the new artificial intelligence technology out there and LLMs, we're going to be able to structure this data to sit underneath a really powerful LLM that's then in turn going to become this like 24/7 coach or doctor for you. And, it will uncover like what you just said about figuring out the stress before the sleep and this and that. Like that took a little bit of work. Like, you had to kind of get into the data to find it. And I think what's going to be amazing is how much gets surfaced without people even needing to look for it.
Yeah.
Just by having this data there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm sort of yearning for that right now because I'm recovering from this surgery, right? So my stats are horrible.
Yeah, it's frustrating, right?
And then, but if I use the AI coach, like it'll say, well, here's what you should do today. It's like, you should do Pilates. And he's like, no, you don't understand. Like, I would like to teach it. Like, here's where I'm at. Here's the specific surgery that I underwent. Like, what are the best practices, for like kind of getting my stuff in range, given the constraints that I'm under at the moment. And it's not quite there yet, but it's not hard to imagine that can be easily, kind of upgraded with an LLM model.
Yeah, that day is coming, and we've got a big update coming for the coach inside the app soon too, which we're excited about. Yeah. I mean, 12 years ago, it was like pretty improbable that we'd be able to measure accurate heart rate from the wrist, let alone heart rate variability or sleep. And a recent version of that was blood pressure, where like a few years ago, it seemed very unlikely we'd be able to measure blood pressure from the wrist. And now we can do it. And so it's like, I'm amazed by what can be done with a lot of intention and intensity from really smart people. And if I look at the rate at which this company, but I would also say technology in general, has been able to accelerate and improve, what's going to happen in the health space is going to be quite profound.
I wouldn't be honest if I didn't confess to being a skeptic of wrist monitored heart rate as an athlete who's always worn a chest strap.
Sure.
And I know historically, devices measuring on the wrist have been wildly inaccurate. How have you attempted to solve that? And do you think that you've solved it?
The first thing is that you have to build a very large data set of chest strap data versus sensor data. And we had an advantage, again, in starting with athletes, in that athletes are very naturally, they have very different body types. So very different muscular sizes of their wrist, obviously different skin tones. And then, of course, there's sweat, there's hairiness levels. All the things that I'm mentioning affect the accuracy of the sensing. And because we were working with athletes, we had to start with this very diverse data set. And so just to say it, like, it's much harder to measure a black man playing basketball outdoors than it is to measure a white man running on a treadmill indoors. And like, I'll explain that for a second. So dark skin's harder than light skin. An activity like basketball has a non-periodic motion set. So it's chaotic, right? It's not like in a periodic motion. And then indoors versus outdoors, interestingly, creates challenges. So outdoors, you've got all sorts of light coming from the sun. Indoors, you have more of a controlled light setting. So those are some things that people just don't really talk about in the space. But because we had to start with athletes, we built a foundation that was looking at harder data sets versus easier. And I remember there would be like papers published from up and coming companies saying how accurate they were at heart rate. And they would always show people on treadmills running. And we were like always critical of that because it was sort of like the easier data set than like what I'm describing as a more diverse data set. I think that over the last 10 years, like we've had Whoop Labs, we've collected hundreds of thousands of data sets alongside the sensor. I think that the heart rate monitoring is pretty great for a lot of activities under a lot of circumstances. I think that there's always that last like 1% or last 5% that's really hard. And so that's what we spend a lot of our time on of making this a product that like essentially makes the chest strap something that you would never need. Mm-hmm. There are some individuals where they either have a certain sort of a certain bone type or a certain way that the sensor sits on their wrist, or they let the sensor be too loose. Like those are things that can make the data not as accurate. And so we're always trying to figure out, is that an education thing that we should be telling that person, or is it unsolvable to have the sensor like not secure, for example, in the right place? We've also put technology out that allows you to wear it in different locations. So it's often the case that if someone, for some reason, is having an issue with wrist sensing, they'll actually get a big benefit from wearing it on their bicep. Mm-hmm. Now, at this point, we're talking about sort of like this 1 in 20 or 1 in 50 type scenario, but we'll make recommendations to people to try it on their bicep, and they often find that can improve their accuracy.
In those early days where you were testing everything with athletes, how did you originally get buy-in from Michael Phelps, LeBron James? Like, how did you convince these guys that you were for real and kind of come on board?
Well, I wouldn't say we convinced them. We went to their personal trainers and we built a relationship with their personal trainers. So Mike Mancias, LeBron James's long tenured trainer, Keenan Robinson at the time was Michael Phelps's long tenured trainer. And we were an unknown company, but we said, hey, we want you to try this technology. And at some point, either the technology works or it doesn't. The insight that we had was to go to trainers. Because a lot of people, when they try to get to athletes or famous people, they go to the person that everyone else goes to. You can't go to LeBron's agent as an unknown company because he gets 100 calls a day. But if it turns out, if you go to his personal trainer, not that many people know the personal trainer. And in the case of a fitness technology, that's the the person you want to go to.
And the athlete is with that person every day.
Right. So that was a bit of an insight to getting to pro athletes. We went to all their personal trainers. And it turned out that these guys spent more time with their personal trainers than often their, significant others. It was pretty interesting. And then at some point the product either works or it doesn't. I mean, one of the reasons that we never did these like big equity deals with athletes or that sort of thing was that I just realized there was no amount of equity or money that I could give a pro athlete to wear a product 24/7 if they didn't want to wear it.
Yeah, they have to want to wear it.
And on the flip side, if they were wearing it all the time, it's because it was giving them an edge. And they were learning about their sleep and their recovery, which was the point of the product in the first place.
But you did do an equity deal with Ronaldo, though, right? Much later.
Yeah. Oh, just to be clear, this is in 2015 because in 2015, keep in mind, the company was unknown and we had 100 people on it. And 2 of them were like the greatest athletes in the world. And so it was an obvious sort of piece of recommendation. Yeah. Like, hey, you should just go give LeBron 10% of the company or something. Like that was just sort of a flippant thing investors would say. Mm-hmm. And I didn't think that was a good idea because of the idea that if he was wearing it, it was because he liked it. And it didn't really have anything to do with the incentive.
Phelps is also the perfect case because there was such a narrative around his ability to rapidly recover. Like when he was just getting up on the blocks like every 15 minutes at, one Olympiad after another and able to throw down world-class performances, the discussion was around like this superhuman ability to flush his lactate, and he just has some capacity to recover that other athletes don't. So from your perspective, being so hyper-focused on recovery and strain, he's almost like the ultimate, guinea pig plus ambassador for the product. And so in that process of him beginning to wear it and you getting insights and feedback from him, like did you glean insights into what it is about him that made him special in that regard?
Well, the first thing I'll just say is that it was unbelievable to see their actual data and the output of their scores because it was so validating to us that we were onto something. Because, we had 98 other people wearing Whoop and ourselves included. And if we went out and did a hard day and had like a 19 strain or something, most of us the next day would be kind of like in the yellow or the red. And I'll never forget looking at a data, like a week from Phelps. And it was like, for those who aren't familiar, the strain scores out of 21, it was like 20.2, 20.2, 20.5. And then on the
day after day, yeah.
And on the 4th day, he woke up in the green. And I remember just like seeing this graph and I was like, wow, it's measuring something that really is going on here. Like this is pretty powerful that you can actually tell that that's Michael Phelps without knowing it's Michael Phelps just by seeing this incredible rate of recovery.
And from a physiological perspective, like what is going on that has allowed him to do that other than just being, highly conditioned?
So there's a metric called like heart rate recovery, which essentially talks about when you get your heart rate really elevated, how quickly does it come back down? Another way to think about it in heart rate variability terms is that he could go from a sympathetic state to a parasympathetic state very quickly. And a lot of that's conditioning and fitness and probably a bunch of his recovery techniques. Mm-hmm. And I can't speak to necessarily all of those, but he was very invested in sleep. He would sleep 8 to 10 hours a night. And when you looked at a really hard workout, it would jump off the page. And then when you looked at rest, it would be like, and for a lot of people, if you do really hard exercise, your heart rate's kind of still elevated for a while and your body's still under stress for a while because it's still recovering. And that's what made athletes like Phelps and LeBron so amazing, I think, is their recovery. It was so, I think, underappreciated. Mm-hmm. Even to this day, it's still, I think, underappreciated.
Yeah. I mean, you become better in recovery, not during the training. You expose yourself to exercise-induced stress, and then your body has to contend with that. And it is in that intermediary period in between workouts when your body's endeavoring to repair itself that you make the gains. And to the extent that you can shrink that window or expedite your recovery, then that allows you to not only train harder, but train more frequently and be less at risk for overtraining or injury or illness, which are the things that really take the athlete out of the game. And anybody who has been an elite athlete in the game for a long period of time has had those experiences.
Yeah, I think you said that really well. And it's been fascinating to get to know a lot of these athletes and the ones who are the very, very best, like the 1% of the 1% of the 1%, they are as obsessed with the other 20 hours of the day as the 4 hours that they were during practice or game or exercise. And they use that time so intensely. And it's inspiring, and there's a cost to it, and there's a sacrifice to it, and there's just a lot that people don't see. You know, I think that world-class performers in general work insanely hard to make what they're doing look really easy. And the athletes that I've gotten the privilege to work with, they are insanely good at recovery, but you don't see how hard it is.
Or the cost that they're incurring in the rest of the other areas of their life to be very good at that one thing. What does retirement even mean to you? Does that compute?
No.
What if we've all been thinking about our future wrong? What if there is no finish line? What if there's only a through line? I'm Rich Roll, endurance athlete turned wellness advocate. I'm breaking out of the studio to meet up with some extraordinary humans, all at different stages in their lives, all with one thing in common. They have no plans to slow down. We'll dive deep and find out what it takes, physically.
Tennis is like relax and then explode. This is like explode and then relax.
Mentally.
We struggle with health. We struggle with mental health. It's part of having a body and having a mind.
And financially.
Should I spend money today or save it for tomorrow? The question you want to ask is, what am I going to regret in the future?
To keep doing the things we love.
I don't hate that pressure. You know, I see it as a gift. This is what we signed up for.
And this is the action plan. This podcast is sponsored by Squarespace. I cannot tell you how frequently I meet people who have incredible ideas, valuable skills, things the world desperately needs, but they get stuck on the tech side of sharing it. There are a couple things these people are missing, which is that no matter how good your idea or offering may be, you still need to make people aware of it if you want anybody to care about it. And second, the tech side of it all is just no longer complex, thanks to Squarespace, which has created this hyper-intuitive, incredibly easy to use, all-in-one, frictionless solution to take that idea and present it to the world. And now they've got this thing called Blueprint AI, and you literally just tell it what you do, what you're about, and it builds you a custom website that actually reflects who you are. Whether you're offering coaching sessions, online courses, consultations, whatever, you can showcase it, schedule it, invoice for it, get paid for it. Because here's the truth, your ideas sitting in your head help nobody. But when you make it easy for people to find you and work with you, that changes everything. So head on over to squarespace.com/richroll for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, use code RICHROLL to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. So as I was telling you in your office, like 6 weeks ago, I had spinal fusion surgery, and I'm in the hospital, and I have the gown on, and they're getting me ready, and I'm about to go under for anesthesia. The neurosurgeon comes in, the vascular surgeon comes in, and at the last minute, I'm like, can I wear my Whoop? Like, I really wanted to wear my Whoop like during this 6-hour surgery so I could look back and see what was happening in my body during that very stressful, 6-hour period of time. And they wouldn't let me because I had an IV like on my, in my hand, and they were like, it's going to get in the way. You have to take everything off. So that was a bummer because I think that would have been super interesting. And I think that speaks to the kind of obsessiveness that you can have with like looking at your data and that connectivity that that this device and your platform has created, where you feel very connected to what's happening in your body. Not just the things that you can feel like, when you wake up in the morning if you had a good night of sleep or not, but those less intuitive things like how much stress was my body enduring throughout the night? And then, of course, the mysterious HRV numbers.
Right.
And so I will tell you that I have put this, I can't remember how many years I've been wearing this, probably 6 or 7 at some point, but I just never take it off. I have to imagine that you experience that all the time. Like there's a deep level of loyalty that your customer base has with this product.
Yeah, it's a pretty amazing relationship that you build with the product, as a Whoop member or someone who's wearing it all the time. Obviously, you become in a relationship with the data itself, and in some ways the product kind of disappears. You almost forget that you're wearing it over time. But you build rituals like, I have rituals around looking at sleep or recovery every morning and like checking how closely that aligns with my intuition and looking at stress monitoring and being in a moment and being like, I felt nervous there. Was my body nervous? And I mean, the biggest thing it's done for me of late is like it gives you permission when your body is run down, so to speak, to not go into overdrive. I think the challenge of being an entrepreneur or CEO is your mind can push your body further than at times it should go, or that's productive for an organization, by the way.
Yeah.
If you're making important decisions. So I just had a newborn and surgery and stuff. So it was, and we launched a product. And so it was a good time to be able to check in with my data and be like, okay, give myself a little bit more rest or a little more permission at times.
Sure.
But it's amazing. I get messages every day now from Whoop members who the products changed their life in one way or another or improved it. And increasingly we get the message like subject line, Whoop saved my life. And that's, very surreal and humbling.
When you first imagined a company out of this idea that you had in college, did you envision when you look around here that it could one day be this multi-billion-dollar, valuated company? Was that always the vision, or do you look around amazed and surprised that you went from there to here?
I think it's a balance of both, honestly. I mean, the truth is when I was coming up with this idea in college, I still have the original business plan that I wrote in 2012. And there was a notion in it of we're going to start with the world's best athletes. Over time, we're going to go to consumers, and then we're going to go into medicine. And if you chart the arc of Whoop, it's been pretty accurate to that. Now, there's been a lot of zigs and zags along the way, figuring out the business model, needing to raise capital, almost running out of money multiple times, finding product market fit, dealing with, this insane number of competitors that we've had and big companies in the space. For me personally, learning how to develop as a manager or as a CEO. But I do think that sort of arc was something that I envisioned early on. And if there's things that Whoop got right, it was around why we were going to build the technology, who we were going to build it for initially, and how we were going to expand into these new markets. And I think those things we did very intentionally. A lot of other things we screwed up along the way, but that sort of overall arc and vision, I think, was pretty accurate.
Yeah. From your perspective as a young entrepreneur and finding yourself in a very, high performance, high pressure environment, are you learning from that? Are you making mistakes? Like, how are you approaching being the shepherd of Whoop while not, kind of falling prey to some of the mistakes that can take you out of the game? Like, how are you walking your walk? Like, it's like a wellness company, but like too much wellness can make you unwell when you're just focused on like building the brand, right? Like the pressure on you has to be insane with the amount of money you raised and the expectations that come with that.
I certainly feel a lot of responsibility. I feel a lot of gratitude for like getting to work on this mission. I think anchoring back in those things is important and actually helps you take on stress. I think another important framework, because a lot of it's frameworks and just in the way you think about your life or your purpose or your job. One is to think of stress as a tool, and stress is an opportunity essentially to get better and to improve. And if you're sitting in the middle of a crisis and you're saying, why did this happen to me? Versus you're sitting in a crisis and you're saying, this is an opportunity to grow. It just, you chart two completely different paths. And look, it took a long time for me to get to that mental framework. And like anyone else, there's times where I'm like, oh man, we got to deal with this now. But if you can keep coming back to the harder it is, the more I'm going to learn from it, the better I'm going to grow, the more resilient I'm going to become, that puts you on kind of a growth path. And I realized early on in building Whoop that one of the most likely reasons for the company to fail was not the idea or the product or the team, the market opportunity. It was me. Like, I was not fit to be a CEO. I was strung out, stressed out, drinking too much coffee, drinking too much alcohol. I mean, I was a kid, but I had a lot of responsibility, and that's not an excuse. And I needed to figure out how to be a great CEO. And if I didn't figure out how to be a great CEO, it was likely the company was going to fail. And so that, internalizing that and owning that, I think put me on a growth path.
Did you have a moment of reckoning with that, like a sort of hitting bottom kind of thing, or was it a gradual realization? And once you had that realization, how did you put in motion, some set of tools to rectify it?
Yeah, I did have a moment. I woke up in the hospital with a panic attack. It didn't even occur to me that you could end up in the hospital from like stress and a lack of managing it or your lifestyle. But
you're building a company that's all about like how you manage stress.
Oh yeah, the
and
irony,
how important it is.
The irony is amazing. Yeah. I was 24 years old, and I remember I was like driving in the car, and it had been a really stressful few weeks. I was struggling with a variety of things, team, capital raising, whatever. I had a few drinks the night before. And all of a sudden I just started to feel my hands go numb. I felt my peripheral vision kind of narrow. And I drove myself to the hospital, and I didn't know what was happening. I thought I had food poisoning because I felt so weird, but it turned out that I was just having a panic attack. And that was a big wake-up call for me. And it was I think the culmination of just a very painful 2 years of trying to get the company off the ground and going from being a kid to being an adult in what felt like a light switch moment. And so I Googled like ways to cope with stress, from a lifestyle standpoint, ironically.
This is actually and like you're the guy who's supposed to know that.
Yeah.
I mean, you're 24.
I was 24. And I discovered transcendental meditation. And so I took a 4-day course, and it really worked. And I've been doing it every day since.
You got the mantra, you're doing it twice a day.
Yeah. Well, the practice has evolved for me. I think in a lot of ways I've moved away from the mantra, but I still credit TM for essentially the gateway to this idea of sitting with yourself and sitting with your thoughts and reflecting and breathing. And I've gotten fascinated by how much breath can control your state. And I've gotten very introspective from the process of meditating. I think initially meditation for me was a tool to feel more relaxed in the moment. Or I knew I had to go into an investor pitch, so right beforehand, I'm going to meditate and it's going to make me feel more calm. I think the beauty of the practice is that it evolves a lot, and what you get from it evolves a lot. And so over time, it started to be much more about not just the period in which I was meditating, but how it made me feel outside of meditation. One theme with meditation, and especially a mantra-based meditation, but I think you develop this over time even without a mantra, is that you let thoughts drift in, and you get to decide essentially with a mantra whether you want to repeat the mantra and push the thoughts along, or whether you want to pause and absorb the thoughts and engage with them. And so in many ways, you're kind of screening your thoughts as you sit there. And what I found is that this started to happen outside of meditating, like just in my day-to-day life of running a company or being a partner or whatnot. And I'd be in a meeting pre-meditation, let's say, I'd be in a meeting and next thing you know, everyone's yelling and I'm yelling and you're kind of like catching up to the situation. You're like, whoa, that escalated quickly, right?
Mm-hmm.
In sort of the post-meditation state, I found that I would hear a voice in my head that was like, oh, Will's about to get angry before it happened. And so it would then became more of a decision like, well, is that what this moment needs? Should I get angry?
Mm-hmm.
And that whole idea of being able to sort of see yourself in the third person in chaotic environments, that's been a life changer.
Yeah. I'm a longtime meditator, so you don't have to sell me on this idea. Even if all it does for you is give you that extra moment of pause to respond rather than react, or to make a more conscious decision about how you want to show up and comport yourself, particularly in a stressful situation. I mean, that is a modern day superpower that most people don't have. But the more you invest in it, the more expansive it becomes. Like it is truly like the answer to so many things. And I haven't done a TM course, but I did have Bob Roth on my show very recently for the second time, actually, who runs the David Lynch Foundation and has been teaching TM he's been doing TM like every day for like 50 years or whatever. And by the end of that, I was like, I'm sold. So next time I'm in New York, I'm going to have him teach me, I think. But it really is, I think, an essential tool, if not the most important tool in the toolbox of just trying to be a conscious person in the world who is endeavoring to show up with the best possible version of themselves.
I 100% agree. I think it's a superpower. And it's the gateway too to so many other offshoots within that practice. Like if you can just start closing your eyes and breathing and seeing where that ends up taking you over a long period of time. I mean, for me, some of the best ideas I've gotten have come from meditating, just in the practice of meditating. It's become an incredibly powerful tool for manifestation and visualization. I've had moments where I felt like I saw everything happen before it happened. And I can't explain that other than that was my experience. Like I meditated on something, saw the whole thing happen, and then it happened exactly like I saw it.
What do you make of that? Like from a mystical perspective?
Well,
I mean, that's wild.
We could take a very, sort of trippy route down this, but my belief from my experience meditating is that the past, the present, and the future are much more related than they may seem. And that's a fairly trippy concept. And it's not something I've really ever talked about, but it's just this feeling that I have that you can remember something that's happened in the past and visualize something strongly enough that's going to happen in the future, and they can actually feel identical. And that is a really, really powerful concept when you absorb it.
The deeper my meditation practice gets, the more the notion of linear time collapses. Like it really is. It is a mental construct that we filter through perception in order to kind of survive in the world. But I think reality is a very different picture indeed,
Okay,
completely. Like we could like do a whole other thing. I don't want to get too distracted by this, but there's a lot there. And I think to bring it back to just the simple benefits of practicing meditation, we're all walking around with these looping, cluttered thoughts that are just interfering with the way that we make decisions in our best interest. And meditation is a way of creating clarity, of truly getting out of the way so that that inspiration can come into us and we can have the peace of mind and the quality of mind to make decisions based on it and turn those things into reality, like on a very practical level. There's a whole mystical aspect of that as well. But it is waking up, like what we think of reality and what reality actually is, I think are two different things. And meditation allows you to awaken to an experience or a sense of that I think is very powerful.
It's amazing. And look, I think that the headline here is to anyone listening to this, try to learn how to meditate, because it changed my life. I mean, I wouldn't be sitting here across with you. This company probably wouldn't exist.
When I went into your office, I had seen videos of you in your office and photos of that and stuff like that. But what I didn't expect when I experienced it in person was the fact that I didn't see a single piece of paper on your desk.
Well,
like uncluttered mind, uncluttered, sort of physical space. Like, is that an intentional thing?
Well, you caught me on a good day in part because we had a film crew in here.
Oh, okay. So it's not normally.
So it's not normally that clean, but I do like the absence of things, which is to say I find that if you're in a room with less things versus a room with more things, if you're in a room with more light, those are things that give me energy and give me spaciousness. I don't like clutter very much. I find it kind of can constrain you. I mean, that's another interesting thing that I would probably attribute to meditation in part, is it turns up your sensitivities in I think a really productive way. And I have a thesis that in order to be a great entrepreneur, you need to be sensitive. You need to feel problems, when you touch a product or you interact with something, you want to have a strong reaction to it, positively or negatively. And you want to be able to play with that dial. And those are things that have helped me more on the creative side of building this company.
You also have to be able to, on some level, foretell the future. Like, you have to have a sense or a feeling, a spidey sense of like what's around the bend in terms of obstacles and problems that your company might perhaps face, but also like where is like all of this going? Like what are we not seeing right now that is going to be very real 5 years from now? And what am I doing about that now? And that's not something I think that necessarily, I mean, you can look at a lot of data and read research or whatever and develop a thesis around that. But I think the best entrepreneurs or just high performers in general, like there's an intuition. There's some kind of like heart brain going on that allows you to like tap into that and make decisions in the present that will have those like large impacts down the line and then, make you look like a genius, because you had a sense of it, in the present.
I think that's right. And there's a question in my mind of how much intuition is informed. Like, is intuition essentially informed by all of these different things, data being one of them, or is it sort of a separate category of information? And I've generally come to believe it's a separate category. Most people would say, okay, the decision you make is based on the data and what you felt and this, that, and the other thing. But I find more often than not, I'm kind of either choosing between what the data says or what I feel. And
what do you do when those two things are contradicting each other?
Depends a lot on what we're talking about. So maybe there's a focus group on a band and the focus group sort of leans one way versus another on which direction the band should go. And I feel an incredibly strong pull towards the other direction. I might just do the other direction. That, though, is a very sort of trivial example, I think. What's been more interesting for me in my life is these moments where I've felt a deep sense of knowing something and a lot of people have disagreed with it. And those are hard moments because you find yourself trying to wrestle. Am I going to believe myself or am I going to believe all these people that I trust and all these people around me? I had a big version of this during COVID because we were talking about the office, right? And during COVID, there was this like immediate tech reaction that was universal echo chamber stuff, that the future was remote. Human beings weren't going to live in cities. We were going to be on Zoom for the rest of our lives. And it just so happened around that time period that I had seen the footprint for what was going to become this building. It was a hole in the ground at the time. And I knew in my gut that that was not the future that we were going to live in. And nor was it the future I wanted to live in. And you could argue maybe it was the future I didn't want to live in. But I was totally sold that we should build this office, that we should get people to come back to the office. This is pre-vaccine. This is my board of directors telling me, you don't understand, Will, the world's really changing. This could be a one-way door, you know. And I just didn't believe any of it. And I was very stubborn about it. And I had this feeling and I trusted it. And so, you know, we got this very cool office, which now has the largest sign in Boston overlooking Fenway Park and the heart of the city. And now it looks great and smart. And of course, we're sitting here and there's an office that's filled with 500 employees and everyone's smiling. But I remember the time when all the data and all the sort of points of view ran completely contrary to something that turned out right.
Yeah.
And I think there's an element for every individual in their lives where they can have that intuition. And it could be intuition about a person they've just met and whether it's a relationship they should have or not have, or what job they should take or not take. And you have to build this relationship with yourself to be able to trust that voice. And it's even worth, you know, keeping tabs on that voice. How often was that voice right? How strong or how loud does that voice have to be for you to listen to it? Are there certain categories where it's really good and other categories where it's a little more unknown, you know? And so again, back to meditation in part, I do think it's a practice that helps you develop this relationship with that voice.
Yeah, the credibility of your intuition is really a function of your investment in your interior self. And I think where people get confused is they mistake what is really kind of like impulse or craving or desire or the grasp of the ego for intuition, because they're disconnected from themselves and they don't have the level of self-awareness or are not committed to doing that kind of personal inventory to parse the two. And so it becomes easy to say, well, my intuition is saying this. Well, is it really, or is it something else? And I think the commitment to like trying to figure out the difference between the two is really important. And when you've invested in your own personal development, then over time, your intuition becomes much more reliable. But intuition is real. We're down like another rabbit hole on this, I think.
The reason it's such an important rabbit hole is because I think for the last like 10 or 15 years, particularly in the technology industry, it seemed smarter, so to speak, to like do all this data analysis and come down to a conclusion based on the data. And if you do that and you make the data-based decision, like you're really smart. This has also been pioneered in what's called the lean startup methodology, which is, you know, you have a very weak hypothesis that you go test, and then if it doesn't prove right, you shift quickly and do a different hypothesis, and it's called test, fail, learn, pivot, right? And so like there's been this huge push in technology for the last 15 years around A/B testing and around lean startup methodology. And I think what got lost in that whole conversation was intuition and a really strong point of view on what the world looks like in the future when you're right. And that's not to say you are right, but it's to say that you have a really strong point of view of what the world looks like in the future. And I think the best entrepreneurs do that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's well said. I think the dark side of that, or the flip side of that, is when you are, to kind of extend the Silicon Valley startup example, let's say you're a startup founder and you shepherd your company into this like unicorn, right? Because you had an intuition about a problem that needed to be solved or whatever, and you do it. What often happens is that individual then over-indexes on their intuition and kind of descends into galaxy brain and thinks that they can like solve every problem, all these problems that are kind of outside their lane of expertise. And I think we're seeing a little bit too much of that writ large culturally right now.
Well, that's because they're not actually listening to their intuition; they're listening to their ego.
Yeah, that's the point I'm trying to make. It's that difference between ego and intuition.
And I actually think they're pretty clear. Like, how often do you find that you're debating whether you feel something strongly based on your ego versus your intuition? Particularly if it was someone asked you an important question. Like, do you feel like you'd be able to decipher that?
Meaning, when I answer it, am I answering it from a place of ego versus intuition?
Yeah.
I think, it's a great question. Let me think about that. I think that it's impossible to completely remove your ego from that. But I think a good indicator is like if I feel like somehow provoked where my ego is being threatened, and then I want to compensate with some answer that casts me in a better light than I actually am. Or am I taking the question from a more open-hearted place where I'm trying to answer from curiosity or like a really good faith, like what do I think about that? Like, I think it's hard. I think it's hard. We're all victims of our ego on some level.
I find that there's a real difference in saying something that you think in order to provoke discussion or disagreement. There's often times where I'm in a meeting and someone puts forth a case and my immediate reaction is just to sort of put forth the opposite case to almost just create a sense of disagreement. And in some ways, like, that's just coming from a place of curiosity or engagement. But if you're in that moment to say, no, that's a bad idea, well, then that is either coming from a place of intuition or ego. And I find that you can parse those apart.
Yeah, I think the better response in that situation, like if you're reactively saying that's a bad idea, then what is it that's being threatened that you're trying to protect? Is there some ego piece to that? But if instead you say, oh, that's interesting, tell me more about that. Like, why do you think that's a good idea?
Yes, that would be a better way to have the discourse. It's interesting to ask the question of, like, when we're talking about intuition in this context, are we talking about the feelings that you have on a minute-by-minute basis? Or are we talking about these big moment decisions where you have to go left or right, and they're like one-way doors? And just to zoom out for a second, I think that it's more useful to think about intuition in the context of those big decisions in your life, because those are the ones you really have to get right. And you want to create a sort of set of processes for which you're really examining, how am I making this decision? Am I making it because it's the mean of what everyone just told me? Am I making it because that's what I feel on the inside? Can I even feel on the inside? Can I even ask myself, And I meet a lot of young people and who are trying to figure out what they want to do with their lives when they're, 22 years old or whatnot. And I have a lot of sympathy for that crowd, because when I was 22 years old, I was starting Whoop and I felt so insecure about it. But I knew deep down it was the right thing for me to do. But there were so many, like my universe all of a sudden collapsed on me, where friends and adults I knew and teachers and they kind of mostly just told me it was a bad idea. And so I really was faced with this question of, like, am I going to trust my intuition, or am I going to trust what all the data says, so to speak, or what everyone around me says? And one framework I've tried to give younger people, but I think it applies to all of us, is this idea of a lot of circumstances can come down to knowing what you want and then trying to get what you want. And the first piece of that equation, knowing what you want, requires an inwards process. The mistake a lot of people make about knowing what you want is they go outwards. They ask everyone else what they should want or what they should do, but they struggle asking themselves. Mm-hmm. And then the process of trying to get what you want is one in which you should definitely go outwards. And then a lot of people get frustrated when they're trying to get what they want, but they're isolating themselves. And so there's this sort of irony that knowing what you want is a process of going inwards, but most people go outwards, and getting what you want is this process of going outwards, but a lot of people go inwards.
That's fascinating. This past year, I unlocked a major life dream, which was to build my own home gym. When it came to selecting the equipment for my gym, I looked at a lot of stuff, and what came out on top was NordiTrack, because what they're doing right now is truly next level, exemplified by my favorite piece of kit, their commercial X32i treadmill, which simulates real-world terrain with an incredible 40% incline and 6% decline. The S27i Studio bike mimics road conditions, and the RW900 rower, it's smooth, it's fluid, and built to keep momentum effortless. But what really sets this apart is iFit Pro. Their new AI coach builds personal plans, schedules workouts, and keeps you accountable, all through simple text exchanges. So stop stalling your progress because you don't know what to do next. Get 10% off with any purchase of $999 plus with the code RICHROLL. Movement has shaped my life. It's a teacher, it's a mirror into the soul, and it's a path that not only connects you more deeply with yourself, but also with others and the world we share. All paths require tools, and those tools matter. That's why I've partnered with On, a brand that honors this movement path with premium sportswear to support it. Everything that On makes is next level in design, clean, and always with function top of mind, lightweight, breathable, and built to adapt. It's gear that disappears on the body, so you can fully drop into the experience of movement. Head to on.com/richroll to explore their performance-driven collection. As a young person who had this intuition, this idea that you felt had value and you had passion for, yet all the external inputs were negative. Like, how did you have the sense of self amidst the self-doubt to lean into your intuition when everybody was pushing you in the other direction?
If you're nervous, be prepared. I did a lot of work. I think that was one thing. When people asked me why I believed in it, I could talk for 2 hours about it. I did all this work on the physiology side. I did all this work on what a business plan could be. I really believed in it. And the more work I did on it, the more I believed in it. And the more I talked to other people, the more discouraged I got. Mm-hmm. And that was just this, inner turmoil that I had to confront. And I think the lesson in it is just that if you're going to create something that doesn't exist, or you're going to become someone that you aren't yet, which those were two things that I was trying to do, right? You're going to face a lot of opposition and rejection. The most rejection I faced in my entire life was from the ages of 22 to 25, because everyone's like, who's this kid who thinks he's going to compete with Nike and Apple? And by the way, I was starting a company at the intersection of engineering and computer science and design and medicine. And I wasn't a computer scientist or an engineer or a doctor or a designer. I get it, I get why that I came across that way. And that's where you have to, build a belief system. I mean, I did crazy things too. Like when I was in a lot of doubt, I would write affirmations. I would go back to visualization. I would keep telling myself that this was real.
Wow. Do you think that being at Harvard even heightened it more because you're at this prestigious university where you have so many opportunities and options that for you to go down this entrepreneurial path, you were sacrificing, so many other things that you quote unquote, should be doing. There's a lot more to lose than if you had emerged from a junior college or, some other kind of place, right? It casts an added layer of intensity over the whole thing because, Harvard is Harvard is Harvard.
Yeah. I mean, I felt like kind of a loser graduating and doing this thing. It wasn't popular to start a company. And I was one of the only people I knew doing it. And all my friends were getting, 6-figure jobs in Manhattan in finance or consulting or whatever. And so I felt like a lot like I was on an island. But I don't think it's a Harvard thing. I think it's a young person trying to figure out what they want to do with their life thing, and it's easy to just compare yourself to others and take comfort in the fact that you're doing something similar to what everyone else is doing. And not wrestle with this hard question of who you are and what you want to do and how that bumps up into the world, and getting on the stage and being told you're bad. And I mean, just if I think back on it, it's so easy for me to remember the pain of, you know, pitching 20 people in a row and having 20 people in a row say no. Like, it was just so painful.
But at some level, you learn to detach your identity from those sorts of scenarios, right?
Yeah,
like not self-identify with the kind of outcomes of those situations.
And I found that incredibly challenging. I mean, for a long time, in those early years, especially, my identity was very tied to the company's identity. So, you know, if Whoop was having a great day, I was having a great day. And if Whoop was failing, I was failing. And the other element to that is, the first thing to understand about that is it's literally not true. Like, you could be performing well in a certain situation, and based on circumstances out of your control, the thing that you're developing may struggle. I've actually seen the flip side of this now, having been around a lot of successful entrepreneurs, where someone's created an amazing rocket ship business. And by the way, the person running it has spun completely out of control. So just to state the obvious, it's very much the case that your own performance and the company's performance are somewhat or very clearly different entities and different things. The other piece, though, is that you have to figure out how you're going to get a little bit better every day. And I made the mistake, again, that I think a lot of other people make too, which is I was comparing myself to the greatest entrepreneurs of all time in my head, you know? And so I'm 22 years old and I'm having trouble raising $300,000. And I'm saying to myself, well, I bet Elon Musk never had trouble raising this much money, or Steve Jobs, or this, that, and the other. And of course, totally unproductive way of thinking about the world. You shouldn't compare yourself to these greats. You should just compare yourself to yourself. And again, if you keep getting a little better every day, you may wake up one day and be in quite a place. And I do believe that most successful entrepreneurs, when they first were getting started, had no idea what they were doing either.
But you need to have those benchmarks, you know, those people that inspire you.
Totally.
Because they kind of like underscore, you know, the vision that you create around that helps you, you know, kind of imagine, you know, the road, the path that you're going to travel and the people who have traveled it before you. But it's about being like right-sized about that. But I think I want to go back to this idea of knowing yourself and how important that is. Like, if you're at Harvard, you're there because you have figured out how to, you know, game the racket. Like, you know how to play you know how to get good grades, you know how to like take the test and do well. And you get funneled on this sort of certain upperly mobile track. That's a bit of a hamster wheel, right? And I think with that, it becomes very difficult to not be myopic. Like, here I am, and the next step is this, and the next step is this, and not be able to like see a broader picture for yourself. Like, everyone around you is kind of moving in that direction. And so that's a lot of noise to identify the signal that is like the true self and the intuition, and, you know, the thing inside of you that wants to be born can get kind of snuffed out, right?
Yeah. If you've been on the default path and that path has been a really good one, which is like, for this example, let's say
it's working,
getting into Harvard and then getting a investment banking internship, and then going through the final review process and getting the full-time job offer, investment banking, and then knowing that after a few years of investment banking, you're going to compete to go to the private equity firm for 2 years. And then after that, you're going to compete to go to the business school, you know, for 2 years. And then you're going to get the offer at higher level at the private equity firm. Like, you can be on that path, that like sort of elite Ivy League school path, let's call it, until you're 40 years old without asking the question of, this is the path I want to be on. And I credit the institutions a little bit because they play into that quiet ego that wants to compete for something without asking for whether or not it's what you even want. You know, if you're a student at Harvard, you've gotten good at winning these competitions. Like, a bunch of people want to go to this thing. And so the banks and the consulting firms, they do a smart job in that they create a very competitive process. And so you feel like it's another thing that you're supposed to go into.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've seen a lot of friends go down that path for 2 years, 4 years, 12 years. And one day I'll get a phone call like, how do I get off this path?
Yeah, there's an existential reckoning. I think there's a certain violence to the fact that society is set up such that it is this competitive race that begins the moment you enter like elementary school, where you're being judged and compared to your peers, and you have to keep track, right? And people who end up at Harvard are, like I said, are really good at that. And there's no incentive or importance placed upon like, hey man, like, who are you? What do you want to, like, what do you really want to do? Like, what are we doing here? You know what I mean? I think it's sort of like, let's ameliorate uncertainty. Let's take the path of least resistance. Let's try to, game as much security into our life that we can, avoid pain. But ultimately, these things are unavoidable. Like uncertainty is a fact of life. You're going to have pain. You're always going to have to do more work. There is no retirement, from the relationship that you have with yourself, and it catches up to you. And it certainly caught up to me. I was 40. I was one of those people. And if you can go on that path and be happy and have a, purpose-driven, meaningful life that's satisfying, more power to you. But I just think for more people than others, like that's not the path. And they're a victim of that because they weren't in a situation where anybody said, hey, like, let's take a beat here and reassess.
I completely agree. I mean, I'm 35, so I've had, probably 20 years of seeing people graduating from college, so to speak, or being 20 years out from college. And so I've seen enough versions of what you just described where, yes, there's some percentage of the people who just followed that path forever are perfectly content with it. But there's a lot of people who have been on it for a while who kind of wake up realizing that they're 40 years old and they don't even know if they're doing what they want to do with their life.
Are you engaged in some practice of like continual personal inventory to make sure that you are on track when it comes to those things that matter?
That's a great question. I've started doing some work with an executive coach, and one of the things we do every year is like a retreat for 2 days where we just hang out and do a lot of exploration of my life and look at how are things going professionally and personally and from a community sense and a spirituality sense and a giving back sense and a health sense. And you kind of look at this, butterfly of your life, so to speak.
Uh-huh.
And if you do that practice enough times or enough years in a row, you start to realize that it's hard to have all of the, again, if you think of it as a butterfly and those different things, are sort of the size depending on how well they're going or how much you're investing in them. It's hard to have all of those things as one equal blossom. Like one year you'll have something that's totally outweighed versus the others. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think an awareness of it will help you shape it so that it's much closer to who you want to be.
Mm-hmm. What can you share about what you imagined your life would be like if you succeeded to the extent that you have versus like the lived reality of it that you can kind of report back? Like when you were at the beginning of this journey and you're like, one day I'm going to have this, incredible office across from Fenway and I'm going to employ all these people and millions of people all over the world are going to be wearing Whoop. It's going to be amazing, right? Right. And you're like, and this is how I'm going to feel, right, about myself. I'm going to be happy. I'm going to be this and that. Now you're here. You've done that. You're young. You're 35 years old. Like, what do you want to tell the young version of yourself? Like, here's what it's really like. It's better than I ever imagined, or like, here's the ways in which, I still feel like I'm myself.
Well, I do think the process of building a company and creating a product that people use to improve their health and their performance has made me more who I am, so to speak, which is like I've had to do a lot of work on myself to get in this position to lead this company, to create a product that is intentionally of service, so to speak, to the world's population. And so that I'm very grateful for, put aside the success, just the fact that this incredibly hard, beautiful, chaotic thing that I've built with really smart people has molded me. And so I love that. I love that being on that hard path and figuring out how to climb this mountain, so to speak, has shaped me in certain ways. And in certain ways, I'm still trying to, mold myself and keep growing, so to speak. I think that the biggest surprise, so to speak, is that I don't feel like a deep, deep sense of I've arrived, I've made it. I mean, even the notion of being quote unquote successful, that's not a word I spend a lot of time anchoring to. I know it to be true, but it's not like a feeling that I have deep down. More what I have is this sense of responsibility and privilege that I get to go fight every day for this company. And that is, I'm using that word accurately. Like, I do feel like building a business like this is a fight. It's hard. And it comes with amazing privileges and amazing moments. And it also comes with really challenging, hard, difficult situations that test you as a man, that test you as a leader, that test your whole value system. And so the role of CEO often is dealing with the crisis of the day. And that too can create its own glasses, so to speak, or can create its own sort of fogginess of the beauty that you've created. And so it is important that I zoom in and out constantly. I think that's something that good leaders do really well, where they can be talking about a design detail that's on this desk right now, and why is that this round, and is it 0.1 millimeters or 0.2? And then they can zoom way out and be like, wow, look at all these people here. And I just got an email from someone and the product helped them lose 40 pounds. And this is going to work out. Like, this is pretty great. So it's everything I just said. And I'm incredibly grateful to be doing it. And that I think is the key. You have to balance drive with gratitude. They're like two different engines that you need to be running at the same time. The dopamine system of building a company works, but you end up miserable if it's just a dopamine system. Mm-hmm. If you tell yourself, I'm going to be happy when we get to be a $10 million company, when we get to be a $100 million company, when we have 1 million people on Whoop, when we have, like, you can keep doing that game.
Well, every time you achieve one of those benchmarks, it just, the goalposts move anyway.
Exactly, because you used all your dopamine up telling yourself how happy you were going to be when you got there.
And then you're not. So it must be because there's this other thing that you haven't gotten yet. Well, you're just continually outsourcing.
Yeah, no, it's because you didn't have another zero. You know what I mean? It's like, it is like,
it's absurd, but like
toxic.
That's the human animal is crazy that way.
So that's the drive piece. And that's the dopamine system. But if you pair it with gratitude and appreciating it along the way, you can be pretty happy while you're still struggling and driving.
Right. But the trick there, of course, is that the dopamine cycle can run on autopilot, like mindlessly, because that's what your kind of ego and subconscious, wants you to do. But the gratitude piece requires conscious effort. Like that's a practice.
A good way to still create the drive, but I've found sort of heightens your feeling of purpose and maybe also quiets the ego, is this concept of you're of service. So I'm of service to all the members who wear Whoop. I'm of service to this team that I've built. I'm of service to the billions of dollars of shareholder value that I need to, return. And when you frame it that way, then it doesn't feel like you're doing anything for yourself, right? You're doing it because you want to lift everyone else up. And I think that in a way can quiet your ego in the process.
Yeah, I mean, service is the antidote to self-obsession.
Well
for
said,
sure.
yeah.
And, this is like, I've been sober a long time. This is like a core tenet of like 12-step recovery, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I can fall prey to, my ego in any given moment. And really that's the best and easiest way to snap out of it and kind of disabuse yourself of all of the nonsense that's going on and tap into that gratitude. And when you're on a mission that is service-based, and to approach it in that way is such a beautiful thing. And with that comes this realization that you spoke to so elegantly, which is your ability to steward this mission-based affair is very much a function of the extent to which you are living the principles upon which the company is based. Like, you cannot be out of balance and stressed out and have terrible, recovery scores and sleep scores and effectively, shepherd this thing forward
totally
and realize its greatest potential. Like, the capacity to serve is so deeply related to you living the principles upon which Whoop is founded and this message that you're trying to put out in the world, and to realize that and understand that that's a core, you lose your ballast if you're not doing that.
And that why, so to speak, not only can it sort of reorient your mission, but it can do the same for teams and organizations. And it's a very useful framework, I think, in a lot of contexts. There was a powerful story I read about a bank that, their sort of mission, so to speak, was to produce as many mortgages as they possibly could. And a new leader came in and changed the why from being about how many mortgages they could produce to how many people they could put in their first home. And just that framework shift, in a year, the bank went from being 7th to 2nd in the mortgages that they put out. I think there's a big lesson in something like that. Like, it doesn't surprise me that creating a motivation that is so inherently positive versus one that's just mostly financial or sort of self-motivated can dramatically shift your performance.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately, we have a really easy mission to anchor on here around unlocking human performance and health span. And when we're pushing ourselves, it's because we want to create a product that's going to make someone live longer or save someone's life or, tell them something they've never known before about their bodies. It's easy to be able to push harder when that is the goal.
Mm-hmm. The other conundrum that comes up with that is the conflict between using this as a tool to improve your, IRL experience, to create the richest experience and most vital and connected experience with life that you possibly can through a device and a technology within a culture that has an unhealthy relationship with optimization, right? And so with that, I'm sure you have people out there who are overly attached to the data and are allowing the data to be kind of predictive of how they feel about themselves and live their lives. Obviously, you don't have a screen on here. You've thought about this. You're doing what you can within the context of what you do to ameliorate that, but it is a thing. So how do you think about how someone should relate to the data, to the product, and also sort of take, autonomy over themselves so that they're not being held captive by it?
I mean, it's a really important question. I think we've pretty intentionally tried to design technology to improve your life, not invade it. And the screen thing is a real thing. It would have been very easy to put a screen on it and have it buzzing and push notifications and all sorts of things. And my critique of the world 10 years ago, but I think it's probably even more true today, was there was just too many things fighting for your attention. And creating technology that lived in the background of your life and was there when you needed it, that to me felt like the right relationship with technology. And so that's that's been at the core of the way that we've developed a lot. I mean, even the product itself is designed to not necessarily even look like a piece of technology. Most of the wearables that came before Whoop had very clear kind of like plastic and glass identities, and ours is mostly material, and it feels like it's blending more into fashion even than technology. So those are some of like the principles, let's just say, behind how we've built the product. I mean, in terms of how people want to use it, I think that they should be comfortable wearing the product without feeling like they need to check in on the data. And again, this is more, we're speaking more to the person who is struggling with the concept that you just described, which is like, are they trying to over-optimize? Are they too reliant on data? So on and so forth. I think that having the data is unquestionably going to be something that is rewarding in your life. And we're just on the cusp of what artificial intelligence is going to be able to do with all this data and what it's going to unlock about the human body. So I think that people will be deeply rewarded for having collected this information about themselves. The idea of, okay, I didn't get enough sleep, and Whoop says I didn't get enough sleep, and so now I'm going to tell myself I'm not well rested all day. I think that there are ways to manage that. I think that at the end of the day, Whoop is a tool, and like any other tool, you have to learn how to use it. And I actually didn't sleep particularly well last night, but as a consequence, that also made me take a cold plunge this morning, take a sauna this morning, meditate for longer, have a great breakfast. So like it shifted my behaviors a little bit because I knew I'd be sitting down with you and I want to have a good time with you, or I run a company and I got to run a company. So I really view information as power, and how you choose to use it is what comes out of it.
I think that's well said. Is it a tool or is it a driver? And I think if somebody has an anxious response to this, it's worth recalibrating your relationship with it. But anybody who uses it has that experience of waking up after, like, I didn't sleep so great last night either. And you're like, oh man, I'm going to meet Will. We're going to do back-to-back. He's like, am I going to be up for it? And the last thing I want to do is like open my Whoop app and see a bunch of red. It's like, I'm not going to cancel, like we're doing this, right? So when the message is like danger, or like you're not, at peak performance, or you're less than today, like what is that doing mentally to you? And I think you do need to have, if you feel like that is something that dysregulates you, then you have to create healthy boundaries around it and perhaps use it for, larger trends rather than the day-to-day. But to the extent that it can then instruct and inform decisions that you can make that morning to course correct, like you did, like with the plunge and nutrition habits, et cetera, it is very helpful in that regard. So it's a little bit of a catch-22, I think, in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, like, most days I wouldn't want to drink 2 cups of coffee before noon or something, but like, because I know I didn't sleep as well, I like give myself permission to do this. Or it's like you just create certain frameworks around it. But there is an aspect of, on this day, I have to do this thing, period. Doesn't matter what the state of my body is, I have to do it. And again, that goes back to a mindset thing, which is like, data be damned, I'm going to do this thing. And I'm going to figure out how to do it. And I do believe you can push your body through anything in a given day. And depending on what that thing is, if it's a 250-mile race, well, there might be consequences on the other side. But if it's a meeting or a podcast or a pitch or an interview, like, you can get yourself there. And on the other side of what we're talking about is actually a very positive reinforcing tool, which is my Whoop said I was run down, but I had to do this thing. I had to perform. And you figure out a way how you do it. And that actually builds resilience.
There's resilience. Yeah. That's an interesting lens on it. You mentioned AI and, where this is kind of all quickly heading. Like, what is your intuition, spidey sense about what's around the bend in terms of wearables and preventative health technology at this point? Like, what do you imagine we can expect to see in the next 5 years?
I mean, I think on an order of magnitude that's meaningfully shorter than that, maybe even like in the 2 to 3 year range, a lot about your relationship with your health, your doctor's office will change pretty profoundly from continuous wearable data and, mind you, other data sets. So you wear Whoop, but you probably also do blood tests somewhere. Maybe you've worn a CGM before. You've got a scale somewhere. You've seen a doctor twice in the last 12 months. Maybe you did a DNA test once. Like all this stuff just sort of like lives in the ether and is not talking to each other and is not connected. All of that information is going to be under one roof. And there's going to be a very powerful AI that sits on top of it that explains a lot of it. And there's going to be discoveries from that. And there's going to be a preventative health side to that, which should really start to change the healthcare industry at large. I mean, the cost of a wearable device or some of these other tests that we just talked about is so much lower than the cost of having to deal with someone who's now diabetic or cardiovascular disease or hypertension, which, by the way, is not like a small problem. Like it's the problem, right? And so, I'm a big believer that wearable technology coupled with AI and other data sets is not just going to dramatically improve behavior from like sort of a lifestyle coaching standpoint, but it's going to change medicine. And it's going to change that relationship with your doctor's office. And in many ways, it's going to feel like maybe more of a continuation of your doctor's office.
In the ongoing discussion around artificial intelligence, I mean, there's certainly rational reasons to, fear this dystopic future. But to my mind, the most optimistic and most obvious best use cases for this are in medicine and particularly preventative health because of its ability to crunch massive amounts of data and make sense of it, because of the ways in which scanning technology is leading to early detection. Like all of these things are going to make us able to short circuit, particularly lifestyle disease, well in advance of it taking root and becoming problematic. And all of these tools, Whoop included, of course, are pieces of that puzzle. And I think that's super exciting. It's also interesting to see people sort of threatened by this. Like the conversation around CGMs is like wild, like how there's a lot of people that don't like the fact that consumers are using that, but it's just another tool from my perspective. It requires some education in order to interpret it correctly so that you're making wise decisions based upon it. But I think once these things begin to cohere and share information and you're able to get a comprehensive, like real-time picture of what's going on with you, and that is communicating in real time with your primary care physician or the specialist, the implications of that, I think, are astounding.
Quite profound. I mean, I think the overall life expectancy of human beings is going to go up by a dramatic amount when this technology all kind of comes together. And so that's a really exciting artifact of artificial intelligence. In some ways, I feel grateful that I'm working in a category where it feels like near 100% likelihood that this is just going to be a good thing for this vertical, which is like AI for health. And I have some, I have a lot of societal concerns about AI in other places. And so it's like refreshing in some ways to just get to focus on the health side of it.
I have this like selfish concern though, or fear being on the elder side of Gen X that I'm going to just miss it. It's like all this lifespan extension is all going to kick in like right, when I either pass away or like I'm past that point of no return.
I think you got plenty.
So I just think, my kids will get it, but I was born a little bit too early for this.
I think the biggest trip is going to be the robots. That's going to be a trip.
Tell me more.
There's a world that's 2 to 3 years away where you walk down Fifth Avenue and you see thousands of robots. And that's just going to feel very different than people going from using Google search to ChatGPT, because it's going to be so physical. I mean, it's going to be just such a different relationship with your world. And instead of getting greeted at a department store by a human, maybe you're going to be greeted by a robot. And over the next 10 years, I think that human beings are going to spend increasingly less time with one another. And I think that the relationships they're going to build with AIs are going to be very real and displace relationships with human beings.
That's the part where I feel like I'm not sure I want to have my life extended. You know, like, is that the world I really want to live in? Like, I don't disagree with you. But when I look at my kids and think about the world that they're inheriting and the world in which I grew up, you know, I have real concerns about that. What does that mean? It's certainly, you know, the direction that we're headed in, and it will just be another version of the human experience, I suppose. But, you know, I can't help but lament what gets lost in that, amidst the, you know, the benefits that will occur also with that, I guess. It's hard to know.
Yeah. And I don't like that concept at all. You know, I think that there's something inherently beautiful about human beings being with human beings and the relationships and the teams. And it's so amazing when you really think about it, that we're these animals that can work in systems of hundreds of millions of people. I mean, you can't put 100 gorillas in a stadium and have it be a sane environment. But you can have a country with, you know, 1 billion people, and somehow they organize and coexist. I mean, that's a very fascinating concept.
Well, it's refreshing to come to your headquarters and see so many people here, you know, like, and that's, you know, your ability to foretell the return to, you know, the workplace and that being something that people are going to want to do, I think is proven correct. But you do it through building a culture and an aspirational environment for people wanting to do that, right? I've been to extraordinary offices in New York and in Los Angeles where you would imagine, you know, every young 20-something person would want to show up at every day, and they're empty and everyone's working from home. So it's not just about like the way the world is moving. It's about the intentional culture that you're creating, you know, to make sure that people are nourished in that way. I'm, you know, very honored to spend this time with you, and also, you know, to be an ambassador of the product.
Thank you.
I appreciate you being such a longtime great partner of the podcast, as a sponsor of the podcast. It just feels really good to work with people who are on this kind of mission-based path to improve the health and well-being of people all over the world. So it's been a real treat to spend time with you today. And I want to end this just by giving you the opportunity to share like what you think is the main or biggest thing that you want people to understand about this mission that you're on, and what you've learned about human health and potential that they could take away and think about and perhaps use in their lives.
I think the amazing thing about the human body is how much it can change or adapt to new circumstances. And I think that there's a lot of people probably listening to this who are in a state of their life where they feel like not as good as they probably could. And they kind of know that. Maybe they're a little overweight, or maybe they don't exercise as much, or maybe they wake up tired, or maybe they're stressed all the time, or maybe they've got a lot of fights going on in their personal life. And, you know, by the way, everyone struggles with that stuff. But if you're listening to that and you're sort of saying like, I want to do a little more about it, I do believe that a self-awareness of your body can make a big difference. And being able to measure the human body and create that relationship with yourself and understand what your baselines are. Maybe you're fitter than you think you are. Maybe your VO2 max is a little higher than you thought. Maybe your resting heart rate's a little lower, but maybe your sleep's really bad. Maybe it's all the opposite things. I'm often amazed how many people tell me they got a Whoop and actually thought they were better at something than they thought, or much worse at something than they thought. But it was different than what they expected they were going to learn when they put this product on. And I think there's a kind of a beauty in that. Like a lot of the theme of this podcast outside of Whoop has been this concept of self-awareness and looking inwards. And I think that as a product, Whoop is one that can help you do that. And then the question becomes, well, what do you do about it? And that's also up to you to decide. But I often find that you can only really manage what you measure. And if you think it's important to wake up well rested, if you think it's important to be fit, if you think it's important to have a normal blood pressure or a low resting heart rate, when you start measuring these things, you're going to quickly identify behaviors and lifestyle decisions that can help you shape them. And so that's what gets me and hundreds of other people at Whoop excited to wake up every morning and push this mission to unlock human performance and health span.
I love it, man. Yeah, the idea that you can't improve what you're not measuring. Like if you're afraid to step on the scale because you don't want to see what that number is, I can understand that same fear applies to the fear around like, well, set aside weight, like all these other numbers, like, oh my God, what's it going to say? It's just going to tell me all these ways in which I'm off base or I'm headed in the wrong direction. And if you're feeling that way, you probably already know that maybe you're not, you don't have everything dialed in, but you have more agency than ever to make these choices. There are resources available that didn't exist, even years prior. And to kind of rip the Band-Aid off and look at that stuff is really empowering. So I encourage anybody who feels that sense of fear to walk through it and take that leap, because on the other side of it, there's so much value, and you're worth it. And I thank you for taking the time today. That was really fun, dude.
Thanks, brother. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, cool.